Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Friday, July the 25th, 2025. I'm a bit behind the times and I probably should have talked about Ozzie Osbourne days ago, but I'm finally coming round to him and I do want to look at his chart. People have said a lot about him. He was a major figure in the musical world, and I think it might be a good idea to look at what was going on, when he died, and perhaps look at his horoscope in general. Additionally, I thought I'd briefly look at Ghislaine Maxwell. Ghislaine Maxwell is in the news again. I think that the Department of Justice has said they want to interview her in the wake of all these Epstein revelations. So it might be interesting to see, what's going on with Ghislaine Maxwell. I mean, she is in prison, of course, but things could change, and I think I want to have a look at her Indian chart as well as her Western chart. But before I look at Ozzie Osbourne and Ghislaine Maxwell, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Friday the 25th of July. So here is the chart for today. By the way, don't forget to like and subscribe, if appropriate. So the moon is still in Leo, as you can see. Moon is at 13 Leo, and it is making a conjunction to Mercury. It's also just finished with a new moon. So we had a new moon yesterday. So it's still very much a new moon kind of day. I mean, the moon is close to the sun. The moon is arguably damaged by the sun. I mean, the moon in Leo, it's in the sun's sign, so it's rather burnt out there. And so we want attention, we want appreciation, but are we going to get it? And that can be the problem with moon in Leo. Moon in Leo and sun in Leo are very different energies. I mean, okay, they sound superficially similar, like wanting attention and so on. But the sun is strong in Leo, whereas arguably the moon is pretty weak in this sign. So there is a difference, and the moon can be, I would have said, rather fragile in Leo. As I said yesterday, the moon in Leo, it doesn't have any dignity unless it's in mutual reception with the sun. Okay, that's different. If the sun is in Cancer and the moon is in Leo, yeah, you've got mutual reception there, but we don't have a mutual reception. Now, moon conjunct Mercury, though, is potentially quite useful. It's a very communicative conjunction. Moon, Mercury are both planets that are linked to the way we communicate, and so it may be quite easy in certain situations to express ourselves, and you could say that the mind and the heart are at one with each other, with the moon and Mercury together. I mean, the moon is about the emotions, the Mercury is about the mind, and arguably, with the conjunction, they are at one with one another. Now, while this is going on, we have an opposition between the Sun and Pluto. So this Sun-Pluto opposition was strong yesterday. You could say it was perhaps stronger yesterday, because yesterday we had the new moon opposition Pluto, but Sun still there, still opposition Pluto. And today is a day when that Sun opposition Pluto is exact. And when you're thinking about Sun-Pluto oppositions, you're thinking perhaps about power. Who has the power? Who is using the power? And indeed, who is misusing the power? And, there might always be this question about who is in control. And so do be careful. Don't throw your weight around unless it's necessary. And also be wary of manipulation. Again, who is doing the manipulation? Who is doing the manipulating? I mean, is it you doing the manipulating? Maybe it's someone else. But in general, Sun opposition Pluto does have a certain heaviness about it. And another aspect we've got is Mars quintile Jupiter. So Mars is 72 degrees away from Jupiter. So that is 1/5 of the circle. So there's a feeling of fiveness with this quintile aspect. And some of us are going to really want to assert ourselves. We want to create effects. We want to apply our energy, and we have ideas about how we might be able to do this. And it starts with perhaps sheer willpower. We want to create effects. We want people to notice what we're doing. And it's not a natural aspect, Mars quintile Jupiter. We might have to force it. We might have to plan it. So if you are trying to assert yourself, be careful how you do it, and think it through. And it's as I said, it's not very natural. But if you have a clear set of targets, maybe it's going to work out. So that's about it as far as the geocentric aspects are concerned. I think that we're still very much in the new moon phase of things. Yeah, the moon is waxing, that is true, and we might take the view that it's the beginning of a lunar cycle. It's a generally fairly fortunate time, but we do have to take it slowly. The sun and the moon are still in the same sign. We can't see the moon, and so we mustn't be in a hurry to reveal things. I don't think we will be. The sun opposition Pluto can be quite secretive, and it often likes to sort of work in the shadows. So that's a view from New York. If we set the chart to Sydney, Australia, it's fairly similar. We've still got the Sun, Moon, and Mercury in Leo, but that new moon is more pressing. The new moon was today, Friday, rather than Thursday, if you're in Australia or New Zealand. So you can very much feel the immediacy of that new moon. And so it is a new beginning, as it is in the Americas, but it's perhaps more intense, and there's even less to say about it, because it's just the beginning. And you don't have to be in a hurry to discuss what's going on. You just need to sort of wait. Just wait a couple of days, perhaps, until you can actually see the moon. And then there is the heliocentric view. So if we put the sun at in the center of the solar system, and what we see is a T-square, and there it is. You've got Venus opposition Mars. Now that Venus-Mars opposition is exact, and Mercury is making a square to Mars, square to Venus. So it's a pretty exact T-square. And so how do we understand this? Well, Venus and Mars do suggest that not everyone gets on with one another, and we could be very aware of the way in which people conflict with one another, that you have different personalities crashing around, and incompatibilities can become very real. But what's the solution? Well, Mercury is the solution. Mercury is square Mars, square Venus, and Mercury can be about communication. If there is an incompatibility, if you feel that you and someone else aren't getting on, maybe there's a way of talking about it, and perhaps that is what the universe is prompting. At the same time, we've got a Sun opposition Pluto geocentric, and therefore we've got Earth conjunct Pluto heliocentric. And so today there is that exact Earth-Pluto conjunction, and it's intense. It's quite wary. I mean, it's a dangerous world out there. That might be what Earth conjunct Pluto feels, and so many of us are being somewhat cautious, and perhaps that's a good thing. Though, as I said, with Sun opposition Pluto, this is the same aspect, just seen in a different way. This Earth conjunct Pluto is about power, and who is using the power, who is trying to be manipulative. That's always a question you have to ask when Pluto is involved with something, especially if the Pluto is conjunct the Earth. So that's about it. There's not a great deal happening at the moment, astrologically. We had a ton of stuff going on yesterday, but now, for the moment, things might be calming down a little. And this may be reflected in my forecast for the 12 signs. I might have less to say than usual. So anyway, let's look at the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Friday, July the 25th, 2025. Aries, you have a sense of fun. It's good to have a sense of fun, and you'll know how to enjoy yourself. And I think in most cases, your sense of humor is going to be finely tuned, and you'll be able to talk in a way that is very convincing. And if you want to tell jokes, look at things in a different way, try to amuse people, feel free. I mean, obviously there's no guarantees that your jokes won't fall flat, but you can have a certain lightness of touch that will be appreciated. And so now might be your chance to show the world that things are returning to normal, at least that you are returning to normal, that you're enjoying having all these sort of planets in fire signs. And while you're at it, Aries, I do think that you can be very convincing. So you might appear quite easygoing and, yes, have a lightness of touch, but all the while people are being drawn in because you are interesting. And it really is the case that you have something to offer. And this does mean, Aries, that if you so wish, you can be ever so slightly manipulative. If you've got people's attention, then you can start to perhaps wheel out your demands. What is it that you want? And if there is something you want, then you can probably get it. And it's all about the way you use words. And I think in most cases, your use of words will be very effective. But Aries, it's important that you do keep moving. You don't want to stay in one place for too long. And this especially applies to relationships. Still there is a Venus square Mars, geocentrically. Heliocentrically, we got Venus opposition Mars. And so with that situation, you may find that on an interpersonal level, it may not always be that easy to get on with people beyond a certain point. I mean, you can get on with people at a trivial level, at a light-hearted level, but if you want to get on with people on a very serious emotional level, then it might not be so easy. So Aries, in relationships, whatever that relationship is, you have to take it easy and not be too intense. I mean, that does matter. And you might want things to be intense. It might make things more exciting. But in relationships at the moment, it really is possible to have too much of a good thing. Taurus, still you value your privacy. You have your boundaries, and ideally you want to stick to those boundaries, and you know what's acceptable, and if anything is unacceptable, you'll probably make it very clear. And so Taurus, do stick to what you know and trust, and don't feel obliged to do anything that you don't understand. And if you're asking questions about it, then that's a good sign that this is not necessarily the right thing to be doing. And so maybe, Taurus, it's just another day when you should stay at home or stay somewhere you feel at ease in, and just not feel that you have to do anything spectacular. Still, there could be pressure. I mean, there is a opposition aspect between the Sun and Pluto, and I talked about this Sun and Pluto opposition yesterday. And so the message is similar. You might want to just do things your way, but there may be pressure from outside that may be very difficult to resist, and you have to get the balance right. You can't just completely give in and just do whatever you're told. On the other hand, you have to acknowledge certain other people, particularly if they're in positions of authority or you're reliant on them in any way. You have to acknowledge their existence, and you have to demonstrate that you are able to take them seriously. And talking about other people, there is a square aspect between Venus and Mars. I mean, there is still a square aspect between Venus and Mars, and this Venus-Mars square, just does remind you that you can't get on with everyone, and some people do jar. I mean, they just upset your balance, and if someone is upsetting your balance, then you should stay out of their way. And you really can't get on with everybody. And if you feel just an instinctive dislike of someone, just accept it. I'm not saying that this feeling is going to go on forever, but just right now, certain other people, could be problematic. And so that means that with close relationships, if in doubt, don't. If in doubt, don't spend too much time with another person. It just might not work out. And finally, there is a conjunction between the Moon and Mercury today, and this Moon-Mercury conjunction can be about your capacity to think and work things out. And if you're in a place that you're familiar with, then I think that your brain is going to work very well. And additionally, you're able to communicate quite powerfully. People will listen to you. So if you've got something to say, then say it. And it doesn't have to be in a face-to-face situation. Perhaps something you say over the phone, or even something you text or you write on an email, can have an immediate impact. And you'll be demonstrating that you really are a serious person who needs to be paid careful attention to. And so even though you're not feeling very sociable, in most cases, you're not going to get ignored, because as soon as you make the effort to put something out, to express yourself, people are very much going to listen. Gemini. It's a bit of a Gemini day. You've got the Moon making a conjunction to Mercury. And this conjunction between Moon and Mercury may bring out some of your usual Gemini traits. You'll have quite a lot to say for yourself. And, I don't think that you'll be lost for words. So Gemini, I think that you're going to be able to talk about pretty much everything under the sun, and you're going to be, fairly spontaneous about it. So you'll be able to speak about this topic and that topic and deal with, different people with different interests, and you'll give the impression, if you so wish, of being interested in what other people find interesting, if you make the effort. And part of it might be that you're able to be quite sensitive. You'll just know what to say, and you will perhaps be able to pick up, on other people's psychology, and you'll know what they want to hear. And if you're, trying to be influential, then I think that you'll succeed, because your ability to speak and with most people. So even if you don't know someone very well, you should be able to start a conversation. And this is, I would have said, a fairly useful trait. But we're talking about words here. We're not talking about emotions. So if you want to talk about things which are quite light, which are not of massively serious importance, then go ahead. Now, if you're talking about emotions, well, that's a different matter. I don't think that today is especially emotional. It's not a time to be trying to be emotional in the way you communicate. You can show some general sympathy with other people and with the kind of things that they're also interested in, but you're not going to be able to show deep sympathy, deep emotional awareness. What do they say in psychotherapy? They talk about coming alongside someone, whatever that means. And if you're a psychotherapist, you're supposed to be able to do that. You're going to be able to do that? Well, maybe if you're a Gemini psychotherapist, but even then, I'm not convinced. So you will be able to show some empathy, but there will definitely be a limit to it. So Gemini, don't try to get too emotional, because it just won't work. And as a Gemini, that is something that you understand. And probably, Gemini, you should avoid people who are heavily emotional, who are angry about something. It just won't work. I mean, there's you trying to be objective, trying to be rational. And then there's another person, could be someone you know very well, and they're just annoyed, and their annoyance could be sort of very, very visible, and their frustrations could be all over the place. And such a person could really spoil things for you. And so, don't take anything too seriously, because it is unnecessary. And do avoid things that are just heavily emotional, because when you start moving onto emotional territory, things aren't going to work, and you may find that you're at a disadvantage. Cancer. We are still feeling the new moon. It's very much with us. The sun and the moon remain in Leo, and so you're aware of what is holding you back, what is perhaps preventing you from seeing the wood for the trees. It's just a difficult time to be objective, and so rather than struggle to understand what's happening, maybe you should just accept the situation and not reach any conclusions. I mean, something is going on. It is a time when Cancerians, they feel that they want to start something, but it's slow work. And if you're in in a desperate hurry to make an impact, you might make mistakes because you're not really very objective about at the moment. I mean, you're possibly more objective than you were yesterday, but being able to really understand what is going on and to be able to cut through the fog, might be hard work. Maybe it's not about fog. It's just being blinded by the fire, and that is related to the moon being just rather too close to the sun. Yet the moon is conjunct Mercury, and that conjunction between the moon and Mercury is it's not so bad. It does mean that in the right circumstance you are able to express yourself, and there's no harm in, for example, admitting that there is something you know very little about. So today, honesty may actually work in your favor, and if you admit to your own faults, I think that actually could be appreciated. Now, this Moon Mercury conjunction could have a financial dimension. I mean, after all, Leo is a sign which in the Cancer horoscope does have financial connotations. And so with Moon and Mercury making a conjunction, you are perhaps thinking about money, and you have ideas about money, and that's all well and good, but just consider the possibility that you are still rather set in your ways. You have ideas about what should be possible with money, and what can be done with money, but are you really being flexible? Or are you just regurgitating something from the past? You had a view about money and it just continues. So, by all means, think about money, but don't think that you come up with any absolute final answers, because it might be that you have to do a lot more thinking, and you certainly shouldn't be making any decisions while both the sun and the moon are in Leo, because there is just simply a lack of objectivity. Now, when the moon moves into Virgo in a day or two's time, things will change. There will be more objectivity, and you'll have a better perspective. But right now, that perspective just doesn't really seem to exist. And then there is relationships. Well, relationships are possible, but you shouldn't regard them as being anything compulsory. The right relationship certainly can work, but in many cases there just isn't enough there to find real compatibility with another person. I mean, you can find out about another person, that can be done. Moon conjunct Mercury, there's a lot to say. There's a lot you can ask. There's a lot of information to process. So, a great time for making discoveries about people. But that doesn't mean that you should necessarily be in a relationship with them. Or if you are in a relationship with someone, it shouldn't be your prime purpose at the moment. I think it's just a day when, in a worst case scenario, you might find that the wrong person is just overwhelming. They take up a lot of your time, and you're left with the question, who are you? Who has the power? Remember, Sun is opposition Pluto at the moment, and so with the Sun opposition Pluto, it's easy to get manipulated. Although you can do the manipulating if you're in the right position to do it. But still, I think that relationships do have to be treated with a degree of caution, and if in doubt, you can probably do things on your own, or at least you can do them at some distance. Leo, you're still feeling the impact of the Leo planets. Yes, we've got the Sun, Moon and Mercury all in this sign. There's still a new moon feel to the day. It's a beginning, and you're not quite sure where it's all going to lead, but you certainly know it's a useful start. And so, because you're not sure where it's all going to lead, there's absolutely no need to do anything. You can just soak it all up and sort of ponder what you're deciding, your decision process. It's a slow process. You can work it through, and if you were to sort of announce your intentions today, I don't think that would work. It wouldn't work, because you're not sufficiently sure of your facts, and also it's just too early. We're at the phase where you've got a seed that is just starting to germinate, and it should be germinating, deep in the earth. It shouldn't be germinating in the sunlight. If it germinates in the sunlight, well, it hasn't got a chance, has it? So, allow things to develop, allow things to settle, and at the same time, you are exuding confidence. I mean, that's what people pick up on. You know that things aren't quite as easy as they seem on the surface. You know that you have doubts, but you don't have to talk about these doubts. And it's nice that people have confidence in you. It's nice that people pick up on your warmth and your energy. But there's no need to take things to the next step. Just exist in the present. Though, with the moon making a conjunction to Mercury, many Leos are going to find it, quite easy to talk, to tell everyone about themselves, and at the same time, you are going to be quite aware of the power dynamic. I mean, after all, there is an opposition between the Sun and Pluto today, and so the Sun represents you, Pluto represents everything that is not you, and you are thinking about who has the power, who doesn't have the power, and if you don't have enough power, you may want to take steps to get the power, but there's no need to make a big drama about it. Remember, the Sun's your ruler, the Sun is in Leo, the Sun is very strong in Leo, so that Sun opposition Pluto might just be a distraction. You don't have to struggle to get what actually belongs to you anyway. And what belongs to you? Well, what belongs to you is power and authority and the capacity to be taken seriously. And if you're not being taken seriously, you can change the situation around very quickly, and all it requires is for you probably to just say something. And if you say something with single-minded intensity, then you'll be listened to, and you will have an impact. Virgo, you perhaps are picking up on a conjunction between the Moon and Mercury. And, this Moon-Mercury conjunction, you could say, is, one of the main aspects of the day. I mean, there aren't many aspects today. And, with the Moon-Mercury conjunction, you're doing a lot of thinking, I hope. You're able to sort of work things out, work things through, and you're able to ask yourself some important questions, and then proceed perhaps to find answers. And it probably doesn't need anyone's help. You can in many cases you can work on your own and study things on your own, and when you're on your own, there are no disturbances, no distractions, no one telling you what to do, and you'll just naturally be able to focus on the things that are important. Now, if you have to deal with other people, you can, and your dynamism will be obvious. Now, you don't want to get too dynamic. I've made this point before on several occasions that Mars is still conjunct the South Node. Mars is in Virgo, so you don't want to assert yourself too much, because that would backfire. And also, there's probably no need to get too emotional. Emotions are not necessarily going to run in your favor, and if you try to exist in an emotional environment and you try to be emotional, it's just not going to work. Emotions are not your strong suit. You can try, you can try to be emotional, but there are other people who are better at it, and so don't get caught. And if anyone plays emotional power games, just don't get involved, because if you do get involved, you could end up losing, because emotions are not really your strong suit, certainly not at the moment. And this says something about relationships. Someone else might have strong emotions, they might want those strong emotions to be reciprocated, but you're not really going to be in the mood. And you can be friendly, you can be warm up to a point, but can you be highly emotional? Can you be super empathetic? What's the word? Can you show tons of empathy? Probably not. And so Virgo, don't try. It's just not worth the effort. But you can still look after your own interests. You can pursue your own interests, and that should be enough for today. So provided you don't stray into emotional bogs, then you should be okay. Libra, you are friendly as ever, no doubt about that. People are going to like you, they'll enjoy your company, and you should find that it's just easy to relate, it's easy to be yourself. You can be relatively spontaneous. I mean, I say relatively spontaneous. I mean, you can't be super spontaneous. You can't be, all things to all people, just bubbling with energy. Not quite. Libra, you're going to want things done in a particular way, and you're going to want to present yourself in a particular way, and you're not going to want to move too far from your own script. But it doesn't matter, and there's nothing wrong with following a script in your social life. You decide how you want to socialize, and you just go and do it. And in most cases, that is enough. And so you can be spontaneous, sure, but only up to a point. And maybe also you are starting to think about your priorities and what is important to you, and how you'd like things to turn out. And this does mean that if you want, you can communicate with great power. People listen, and you can focus your mind on the things that matter. And this is obvious, and because of this focus, you're able to really get to grips with things and reach a new level of understanding. And you perhaps didn't think you could get to this level, but if you try, I think you can reach a stage where you just get something like never before. And this is appreciated. This is what people want. And you may be very good at explaining things. Once you start explaining things in simple language, people will really respond to you. But I'm talking about people in general. I'm not talking about things on a sort of a one-to-one basis. And for many of the 12 signs today, one-to-one relationships, they seem good in theory, but in practice, they may not work out. And part of the reason is, we've got, still got Venus-Mars square, geocentric, and we've got Venus-Mars opposition, heliocentric. In fact, today there's an exact heliocentric Venus-Mars opposition, and that could have an impact on you. And you could, at a certain point, realize how different you are from another person, and that might bother you. And so the question is, how do you respond to it? Well, if you look at the heliocentric picture, you've got Venus-Mars opposition, and you've got Mercury on a T, Mercury square Venus, Mercury square Mars, and Mercury might be the answer. And it's possible that if you want to get on with people, if you want to resolve sort of interpersonal incompatibilities, then you can. And it's all about talking. Keep it logical, keep it rational. Focus on the things that you regard as being important. And through the power of your words, it does seem that certain issues and incompatibilities can potentially be resolved. Scorpio, we continue to feel the new moon. So there was a new moon yesterday, but really the new moon is still in operation today. I mean, the sun and the moon are both in Leo, and Mercury is in Leo as well. And this does mean, Scorpio, that you're going to be pretty good at expressing, who you are and what you want, how you'd like things to pan out. And this means that if you're working or you're in any position of authority, then you will be taken seriously, and you can explain yourself, and that does matter. It's not enough to tell someone what to do. You have to explain why it is important that they do what you request of them. And so your capacity to explain at the moment is extremely good. And even when you're asking someone to do something that it's not obvious why they should be doing it, you can still come up with a good reason. And in general, Scorpio, today, I believe that you will be very very persuasive. People will listen to you, and your words will carry great weight. You don't have to use very many words. In fact, it may be the case that the fewer words you use, the better, but it's just the way you articulate those words. You come over as being quite intense, and everything has great sort of meaning and power. So Scorpio, if you're trying to be persuasive, I think in many cases, you can be successful, but do be aware that heliocentrically Venus is opposition Mars. So remember heliocentric, sun at the center of the solar system. So Venus is exactly opposition Mars, and so that does indicate that there'll be times when you and another person don't necessarily see things in the same way. And the question is, what do you do about it? Now, it may just be that you are persuasive enough to get someone to see your side of the argument and to prevail. But Scorpio, you may need to demonstrate some responsibility here. Just because you can win an argument doesn't mean that you should. Because an argument is a temporary thing. you may be able to persuade someone to do something or even think something in a moment of time, and you might get some satisfaction. But what happens when the interaction stops? When someone has a chance to think for themselves, then they might change their mind again. So persuasiveness on its own, is not enough. Clever word games. Yeah, you're good at clever word games, particularly now. But what you really need to do is allow people to realize for themselves that you are right, that your view is right. So that's different. And maybe it's not about clever words, clever explanation. It's about demonstration, or even just using your own example. You can be a role model. If it's working for you, then perhaps it can work for other people as well. Sagittarius. Today is not so different than yesterday. Yesterday we had the new moon. Today we've still got a new moon. We've still got Mercury in Leo, and that means, Sagittarius, that there is still an emphasis on the beyond, not being satisfied with the way things are right now, just knowing that there's something beyond it all. And whatever that beyondness is, well, it could be spiritual. We could be talking about the divine, something universal, something cosmic, and you just know it's there. You know that it's speaking to you. Perhaps it's speaking to you in everything you do. The coincidences that come up today, just what happens today. The universe is talking, and maybe it's all just becoming clear to you. But it's not necessarily just about the spiritual side of things. You are able to see things in a new perspective, and your ideas are changing. Your ideas, not just about spirituality and the cosmos, but your ideas about yourself, about the society in which you live. There could be a political dimension as well. Starting to realize that how things should be run, and if things are run badly, it'll just seem very, very obvious to you. And so, perhaps, it's a time for shifting, some of your beliefs. As a Sagittarius, beliefs are important to you. Remember, Jupiter rules Sagittarius. Jupiter is a planet that has a strong sense of right and wrong. And at the moment you have this sense of right and wrong, what is just, what is unjust. And you can very much tell the difference. And your own stance is perhaps now becoming more moral. And that may be how you experience the new moon. The new moon could even represent a new morality. As you've learnt new stuff, as you've experienced new stuff, the concept of right and wrong really does become increasingly important. And you can look at what's happening around you. You can look at the whole sort of universal tragedy, and you're aware of tragedies happening the other side of the planet, and that's informing you, and it is making you a moral person. At least it can make you a moral person. I mean, there are other ways of looking at this energy in Leo, the fact that the sun is moving into Leo, and you can say the usual stuff. You can talk about long distance travel, but as I like to say, long distance travel is not quite as wonderful as it's cut out to be. It's very often not going to get you anywhere, and that you can do all your traveling without moving anywhere. It's all about having the right state of mind and being open to new possibilities, and perhaps new levels of conscious and even unconscious awareness. So, do think about your boundaries. You need to go beyond your boundaries and start to realize that there is something larger from yourself out there that you possibly need to become a part of. Capricorn, you, like yesterday, realize that some things do have to be taken seriously. They can't be trivialized. And, as a Capricorn, you're not someone to trivialize. You understand that there are serious matters out there, and you have to really pay attention to them. And you can't just sum it all up, very briefly. You have to really think about it all, and you have to, do the sort of requisite level of research. And research takes many forms. It can mean asking questions, but it can mean really deep thinking. You think deeply about something, and you eventually come to conclusions. And things are not always obvious. It just takes time for it all to develop. So don't make the mistake of thinking that anything can be trivialized. And if something seems out of place, then pay attention to it. It's not something you missed. You don't miss much. And so if something doesn't make sense, is in the wrong place, then that is a sure sign that something has happened and that your time and attention are required. And, is it possible to go into something too deeply, Capricorn? Well, I would have said, probably not. And, there is a question, what do you do about it as you start realizing things? Can you talk about it, for example? I think quite possibly you can. At the moment, Capricorn, you're able to communicate in a way that is powerful. You give the impression of being very sure of yourself, and you don't use words in a sort of a trivial kind of way. Every word matters. You've weighed up every word. And because you're able to use the right words, people do take you seriously, and they do realize that you have got something important to say. Though it's not just you that's got something important to say when it comes to close relationships. Do listen to what the other person is saying. They may decide that now is the time to talk about something, and you need to be there to listen. And if someone wants to talk about something serious, then it's probably a good idea to drop what you're doing. You always need to give time to people if they have something important to say, or at least today you should be giving time to people. Because if you don't give time to someone and they've got something important to say, then you might miss the moment. They're ready to communicate, and if you're not ready to listen, you might have missed your chance. Rather like missing a comet, like Halley's Comet or some other comet. It arrives and you have a chance to see the comet, and then it goes away and you don't see it for decades. And it's like that sometimes with conversation and communication. If you're not ready to engage, you might well have missed your chance. Aquarius, still there is an emphasis on relationships. I mean, this can't be helped, and that is because the Sun and Mercury and Moon are in Leo, and Leo is your opposite sign. And also the Sun is now exactly opposition Pluto. I mean, the Sun was pretty close to an opposition of Pluto yesterday, but now it's exactly there. And that does say something about how you relate. And also it's a question of, what do you give away? I mean, we always have to give away something. You can't keep everything to yourself. and sometimes it's necessary to reveal things. We don't, want to reveal them, but if we keep everything secret, we're just not going to make any progress, and we're just going to be suffocated by all the stuff we're keeping to ourselves. It needs to be released, but there's always that threat, isn't there? That what would happen if another person really knows what's on our mind? It might be bad, but maybe it's a situation where we need to take a risk, and we shouldn't assume that everyone is up to no good, that everyone is going to betray our confidences, because the sun is in Leo. The sun is a planet which has a lot to do with relationships, and the sun is strong in Leo. It's dignified in Leo, and that might say a lot about another person who can be there for you, and they might be in a better position for you. They might be stronger for you. They might be more talented for you. Yeah, it is actually possible, and that shouldn't bother you. You can benefit from having powerful people around you. Well, the right powerful people around you. With Sun opposition Pluto, it is possible that some people do try to have an influence over you, an undue influence over you, and their motives are not good. But Aquarius, I think that you can recognize that and make the right choices. And if you're stuck and if you don't know whether to trust someone, what do you do? Well, the best thing to do is to talk to them. Get someone to open up about what they think, what they believe. And if they're prepared to talk, then that's a sure sign that perhaps you can trust them. People who don't talk, who refuse to say what's on their mind, they only give you half answers, then yeah, those people could be a problem. But if you find that someone is talking freely and they're talking with what appears to be authenticity, then I think that there's a good chance that you can trust them. Pisces, there is work to be done. I said this yesterday. Yesterday we had a new moon. This new moon is still in operation. The sun and the moon are still in Leo. Mercury is in Leo, and so this is a time when you've just got things to do, and you should have as your first priority just getting things finished. May not be what you really want. You'd prefer to be doing something more interesting, but if you don't sort it out now, when are you going to sort it out? So you could say, Pisces, that really now is as good a time as any. So if you are aware of any obligation, then accept the obligation. Just do it. Do what's required of you, and then things will come together quite nicely. It might take a bit of time. At first, you might feel sort of annoyed and impatient, but if you just keep going, then soon enough things will start to resolve themselves. And also you have to you have to think about the future and what is required in the future. And the first thing that's needed is that you need to prepare for the future. And one way to prepare for the future is to clear the decks. You have to make sure everything is clear, because if things aren't clear, you just don't know what's around. There may be sort of metaphorical rats in the basement. I'm not saying there are rats in the basement, but what I mean by rats in the basement, just things that are festering, that are running around and causing chaos because you just haven't been bothered to attend to them. And if you sort things out, including sorting out the metaphorical basement, whatever the basement is in some psychological language, then you're going to be clear. And with clarity comes progress in lots of directions, including relationships. I know relationships are something that many people regard as being important, and relationships have recently been a bit problematic because Mars is still in Virgo, your opposite sign, and it's going to be in Virgo for a bit longer. And so while it's in Virgo, while it's conjunct the South Node, some people, they do like to throw their weight around. They want attention. But if you think about yourself and you're prepared to make it clear, what is important to you, what you're prepared to accept and tolerate, then I think other people will listen. And so, don't assume that because people have been a problem in the past, they're going to be a problem in the future. But, they are starting to see reason, and if you make it clear what you want, then the response in the end might be to your liking. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And it's now time to look at the I Ching. And so I asked the question, what is Friday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 18, which is illness. In the Wilhelm translation, this hexagram is called work on what has been spoilt. And so with illness, it's not about some serious malaise which is just going to drag us down. It's more about something that can be sorted out. And there is a question about what is the source of the illness. And so the first thing to be aware of is that something isn't right. And because something isn't right, it needs to be fixed. And the question is it our responsibility? And what the I Ching does is it, in terms of its moving lines, is it talks about where the source of the illness might be. Is it to do with the past? Could be our ancestors, or it could be our mother or our father or something else. And is it ours to sort out? Now, we do have the second line moving, and here it's the I Ching says something really, really bizarre. I mean, certainly bizarre, perhaps by modern ears. And it says, the second line is saying, the illness relates to the mother, and the sick mother. Because this is talking about it in a sort of a symbolic way. I mean, I'm not saying if your mother is still alive that she is sick. That's not what I'm saying. It's rather that you should have nothing to do with it. Believe it or not, you should let someone else deal with your mother's problems. And I Ching says you should let your sisters deal with it. I mean, that seems quite a harsh thing to do. But if we kind of translate that into something more modern, yes, there is a problem. Something isn't right, but it might not be our domain. Just because we're aware that something is wrong, it doesn't mean that it's up to us to fix it. Perhaps someone else can sort it out for us. And additionally, it may have something to do with the past. People have done something wrong in the past, and it's up to them to deal with it. Then the fourth line moves, and then that talks about the father being sick. Now that's more serious, according to the I Ching. And there is, in the end, action is required. So we have to work out, if we feel that something is wrong, we have to work out where to put the action. Some things we can't change, or we shouldn't try to change. Other things we can definitely change. So we have to be able to work out what our domain is, where we can be useful. And so there is going to be a point where certainly something has to be done, and it's up to us to sort the problem out. Then the top line moves, and the top line moves, and it's saying, well, does it really matter? We're moving beyond all of this, and it's challenging us to rise above the situation. So in the end, we look at something that might not be working out well, it might be in a state of decay, and we just need to rise above it. It's not up to us. And I'm thinking that might be our country, for example. I'm sure many of us, when we look at the country in which we live, we regard it as being in a state of decay. Certainly in terms of the UK, obviously I'm not in the UK at the moment, I'm in the United States, but from what I can gather, the UK is in a state of decay. Can I do anything about it? No. Should I try to do anything about it? Well, what would be the point? Well, now that's a bit complacent. We can always do something, but the I Ching is telling us that maybe we're just too attached to something. We see it going wrong and we take it very seriously. Maybe we shouldn't take it seriously. Maybe this is just material stuff, and we can indeed rise above everything. And we have these moving lines, and so because we've got moving lines, we can move to a second hexagram, and the hexagram we move to is hexagram number 62, which is preponderance of the small. And this is telling us not to take on too much. I mean, we are tempted to take on too much with illness. We think there's a big problem. We've got to sort this out. We've got to sort that out. It's all our personal responsibility, but it's not. There are things which we can't do anything about, and we shouldn't even try. There are other things, yes, where we must put in the effort, but we shouldn't think that we can sort everything out on our own, or even that we should sort everything out on our own. And the preponderance of the small probably means deciding what our domain is, where we can be useful, and not taking on too much, but just sorting that out. And that is certainly something we can do, and it maybe just be about carrying a small weight. If you look at the hexagram, okay, it looks like an H, doesn't it? But in the middle of the H is that weight, and it's quite a small weight, and it's carried by sort of long handles. And so that's maybe what we've got to do. Take something small, something manageable. We can work on it, make some progress, perhaps resolve it, but we can't really take on too much right now. But still, through our own actions, we can make things a bit easier. And now I want to go back to the astrology. And so two people I wanted to look at were Ghislaine Maxwell and Ozzie Osbourne. And so I'll start off with Ghislaine Maxwell. I'm told that you don't pronounce the S, so it's spelt Ghislaine Maxwell, but you miss out the S, so it's Ghislaine Maxwell, or something like that. And so, she has kind of been in the news recently. People had forgotten her for a long time. They thought she was just sort of stuck in prison in Florida, and she was going to be there for years. But now her name is coming up again because of all the sort of the Epstein files, and the Department of Justice have I think subpoenaed her. They want to interview her, and so the question is what's going on for Ghislaine Maxwell at the moment. So there has been a new moon. The new moon was on 2 degrees Leo. This could have had some influence on her. I mean, Ghislaine Maxwell does have her moon in Leo, and so with this new moon quite relatively close to her moon, well, it's 12 degrees from her moon, which is quite a long way, but still, that could have, stirred things up. I mean, that's one thing that could have stirred things up. And don't forget, Ghislaine Maxwell, she's got Sun in Capricorn, Moon in Leo, and I would have said, from what we know about Ghislaine Maxwell, that she's more Moon in Leo than Sun in Capricorn. So Moon in Leo, she probably has quite a high opinion of herself. I mean, she's not stupid. She's a very intelligent woman. Some would say that she could have made better use of her intelligence. I mean, she enjoys reading, and she is, I think she went to Oxford, didn't she? So she is an intelligent woman. But the moon, she's got that moon in Leo, so she perhaps is rather proud and also fragile. It's not the sun in Leo, it's a moon in Leo, and that may say something about her relationship with her father, Robert Maxwell. Robert Maxwell was this overwhelming figure who, in many cases, was up to no good, stealing the pension funds of the his Mirror employees to keep the company going. And so, she had this incredibly strong father, and so you can imagine sort of poor Moon in Leo having to deal with this massive figure in her life. And as far as the Sun in Capricorn is concerned, I mean, obviously, I don't know a great deal about Ghislaine Maxwell, but I would have said that the Moon in Leo would be more descriptive. And yes, there has been a new moon in Leo, and that seems to have brought her back into the limelight. And additionally, she has got a Sun-Venus conjunction in Capricorn. Now that Sun-Venus conjunction, two male planets on the 8th house cusp, they may say something about the men in her life. And they are in sort of early Capricorn. So at the moment, she's got Saturn and Neptune sort of square her Sun-Mars conjunction, and so again, that is something that sort of may have sort of brought her out into the limelight. And as far as her solar arc directions are concerned, here, she's 63 years old. And so we move all the planets 63 degrees. And so, what are the main solar arc directions, at the moment? So, she has got Saturn at 28 Capricorn. And so her solar arc directed Saturn is currently at 3 degrees Aries. So if her solar arc directed Saturn is at 3 degrees Aries, so she's got transiting Saturn on her, quite close to her solar arc Saturn, and at the moment her solar arc Saturn is very close to the square of her Sun, and that's not necessarily an easy direction to have to handle. I mean, it is about restriction, and it's also hitting her Sun. What is her Sun about? Is it her, or is it the men in her life, or the former men in her life? And of course, one man in her life was Jeffrey Epstein, and so that sun in the 8th, she's having to deal with it via the solar arc Saturn square, and so that's one thing going on. Another thing is that her solar arc directed Venus is at 0 degrees Pisces, so it's opposition her Uranus. So solar arc directed Venus opposition her Uranus, that might indicate that something is activating. Remember, she's also got transiting Uranus square her Uranus. So, if we think about the Uranus return, we were thinking about Uranus returns with Ringo Starr and Paul McCartney. They've got their Uranus returns at the moment. Particularly Paul McCartney. And so, when you're around 84, you have your Uranus return, but then you have the last quarter in your Uranus cycle. So, when Uranus has still got it is still only 3/4 of a way through its cycle, and that's where she's at the moment. At the age of 63, Uranus is square her Uranus. There it is. So remember, Uranus is at 0 degrees Gemini, so it's square her Uranus. But also we got Venus hitting her Uranus. So that Venus opposition her Uranus, there's some kind of shock, some kind of surprise going on with Ghislaine Maxwell, and then there is her her Vedic chart, and so I think it's a good idea to look at her Vedic chart. It gives us an idea of where she is in the chart's development as she goes through the 9 phases of life. And so with Ghislaine's Vedic chart, so here is her chart. You could argue that she has Kalasarpa yoga. Now, some would say she doesn't have Kalasarpa yoga because, strictly speaking, to have Kalasarpa yoga, you need to have all your planets on one side of the Rahu Ketu axis, and so she does have Moon on one side, but the Moon she's got the Moon in the same sign as the North Node, the Moon in the same sign as Rahu, and so I think you could argue that she does have Kalasarpa yoga, and if she has Kalasarpa yoga, then this is someone who through her life attracts really quite dramatic and perhaps unfortunate events. Kalasarpa yoga, her father, the domineering figure, get involved with stealing money from the pensioners of his company, and then him falling off a boat, I think perhaps committing suicide, and then you've got the Jeffrey Epstein thing. So this may be Kalasarpa yoga at work. And as far as her Vimshottari dashas are concerned, she started in October 2023. She started her Rahu dasha, and she's got the Rahu in the 3rd house, conjunct the Moon. So the Rahu dasha, it lasts a long time. It lasts for 18 years, I think. Yeah, it lasts 18 years. So you might say, well, that's 18 years in prison. Is it 18 years in prison? I don't know. Her Rahu is not necessarily so bad because it is in the 3rd house. So the third house is a growth house, and Rahu is a malefic. So it's not necessarily so badly placed in that house. And so her Rahu Dasha has started. And next year in June, she's in her Rahu Mahadasha and her Jupiter Subdasha. And I wonder how that Jupiter Subdasha is going to work. Now, she does have Rahu opposition Jupiter in her natal chart. So, from a Vedic perspective, the time to look for is, just under a year's time, from June 2026 through to November 2028. So that's sort of approximate 2.5 years, just under, starting in 2026. Could be quite important. So her Jupiter really does need to be considered, and there is this question about what is the condition of her Jupiter. Now, on the face of it, her Jupiter is not in great position because it's in Capricorn. It's fallen, but she has Nietzsche Banga Raja Yoga, I think that's what it's called. And a lot of people born in 1961 had Nietzsche Banga Raja Yoga. And Barack Obama, for example, had Nietzsche Banga Raja Yoga. And I think his Nietzsche Banga Raja Yoga was a key part of why he got elected as president, and how he did so well in terms of getting to be president. And so what Nietzsche Banga Raja Yoga is it's when you've got a planet that is fallen. If this is my understanding of it, maybe I've got it wrong. I don't really make any claims to have any great expertise in Vedic astrology, but she has Jupiter in Capricorn. So you would think Jupiter in Capricorn, Jupiter fallen in Capricorn, because Jupiter is exalted in Cancer. That's not great. But with Nietzsche Banga Raja Yoga, you have to consider the ruler of the exaltation. So Jupiter is in Capricorn. So what is the ruler of Capricorn? Well, Saturn is ruler of Capricorn. Okay, you might say the exaltation ruler is Mars. But I think what we look at Saturn here, and the thing is, she's got a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. So because she was born with a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, the problem of Jupiter in Capricorn in its fall may be negated. So that is a possibility, and I believe that is what is meant by Nietzsche Banga Raja Yoga. I mean, I stand to be corrected there. I mean, possibly. And so with Jupiter coming up, Jupiter may not be as weak as it seems. Jupiter seems to be the weakest planet in her chart. By Shadbala, it has 0.85. It's really low score. Shadbala is a way of scoring planets. So Jupiter can be sort of misleading here. So it seems to be difficult, but it just may not be quite as difficult as it seems. So it's possible that from June of next year, something changes in terms of her prison conditions. I think it's unlikely that Trump will pardon her, but something might happen. So maybe things aren't quite as bad as they seem. On the other hand, we do know that, as I've just pointed out, she does have solar arc directed Saturn in her Western chart, square her Sun, and she does have solar arc Venus opposition her Uranus. So those could represent a few problems. And maybe I have to look at Ghislaine Maxwell's chart with a greater eye to detail, because I think there is a lot going on here. And so let me now turn to the horoscope of Ozzie Osbourne. I'm doing this out of completeness. I've read the comments. People have mentioned Ozzie Osbourne, and they would have liked me to have looked at his chart. Now, Ozzie Osbourne, in terms of the Rodden rating, there are ways of rating a chart in terms of the accuracy of the time. And what one's looking for is A or B. Ozzie Osbourne is rated as a C, and C basically means, there is talk of him being born at a particular time, but it's not confirmed. I think people have suggested that Ozzie Osbourne might have been born at around 6 a.m, maybe, but we don't have any confirmation. And the problem with UK birth certificates is they don't have a time on it unless you're a twin. Of course, in Scotland, of course, the birth certificates do have times on them. So turning to Ozzie Osbourne's horoscope, again, I don't have an ascendant for this. I mean, some might say, "Oh yeah, there is an ascendant. It says he was born at 6 a.m. or whatever." But for me, that's just not good enough. I don't have the confirmation. So here is Ozzie Osbourne's horoscope. Not surprisingly, he is a Sagittarius. I think that Sagittarius and being a performer, having a dramatic act, is absolutely fitting. So it's not surprising at all that Ozzy Osbourne is a Sagittarius. And additionally, he is a Capricorn. Now that might sound surprising that he's a Capricorn, because you might associate Capricorn with someone who is very, very staid and sensible, and you would not expect someone like Ozzy Osbourne to be a Capricorn. But we shouldn't forget that Janis Joplin was a Capricorn, and she was known for being sort of quite outrageous and larger than life. And so, just because someone is a Capricorn doesn't mean to say they have to be staid and get a job in the civil service, for example. But there can be a down-to-earthness to it. I mean, I don't really know very much about Ozzy Osbourne, but there may be a groundedness to it. And also he's got moon in Capricorn, so I don't have his time of birth, but for sure his moon is in Capricorn, whether he was born at noon or midnight or the beginning of the day or the end of the day. And so if you've got moon in Capricorn, you know how to look after your own interests. He may appear to be outrageous, he may appear to be larger than life, but something in him is still thinking about his own financial interests. You've got to look after the financial side of things. And additionally, he's got a Mars-Jupiter conjunction in Capricorn. Now, with the Mars-Jupiter conjunction in Capricorn, the question is, do you need to actually look at the sign? Because Mars and Jupiter as a conjunction, it can be over the top. That's Mars-Jupiter. Mars-Jupiter can actually be a very dangerous conjunction. It can be quite an excessive conjunction, and having a lot of energy and not always knowing what to do with that energy. I mean, there have been times in his life where he took a lot of drugs, but he died at the ripe old age of 76. Okay, could have lived for longer, but you might say, as far as sort of rock stars are concerned, 76 isn't such a bad age. And yes, with Mars-Jupiter conjunction, he certainly had a lot of energy there. And from a generational viewpoint, I mean, he had Uranus in Gemini. So Uranus was in Gemini during the 1940s. And so he was really right at the tail end of that Uranus in Gemini, the first generation of baby boomers, the Uranus and Gemini lot. And so Uranus and Gemini is looking for variety, having many and various interests, as a generation. And it was the post-war generation. Suddenly there were possibilities, even though Ozzy Osbourne came from a sort of working class background, there were opportunities for him, but maybe wouldn't have existed if he'd, say, been born sort of 10 years earlier. And so he was able to sort of avail himself of those opportunities. So as far as midpoints are concerned, there are a couple of midpoints of interest. And those midpoints, some of those midpoints relate. There's one aspect that is interesting about Ozzy Osbourne, and perhaps unexpected, is he has Mercury square Saturn. And it's a very close square between Mercury and Saturn. And Mercury square Saturn may have given him the discipline to do what he did. Just stay with it. He didn't fade away. I mean, that is a very positive view of Mercury square Saturn. Mercury square Saturn may also say something about his sort of language. It can be quite harsh language. Was he responsible for harsh language? I don't know. But Mercury is about how you communicate. Mercury in Sagittarius. So Mercury in Sagittarius, well, it perhaps needed some discipline, and maybe Saturn square Mercury was was providing it. And interestingly, his Mercury and his Saturn are both on the Venus-Jupiter midpoint. And so how do we relate to that? And so looking at his midpoints, if we look at his 90-degree dial, and so there are his where's his Mercury and his Saturn. You see Mercury and Saturn, they're together because squares are shown as conjunctions on the 90-degree dial. And so his Mercury, his Mercury and his Saturn are both on his Venus-Jupiter midpoint. Now, you would think that might squelch the Venus-Jupiter principle, but it could be that the Venus-Jupiter, was a lucky pairing, and somehow he was structuring his life so he could be completely Venus-Jupiter. I mean, there's certainly something very indulgent about Venus-Jupiter, and certainly he was indulgent in the past, and he maybe had to deal with the consequences of it, but perhaps he was able to structure it, and it was said something about the way he was performing and something about his art. And additionally, he has I think it's a semi-square between the Sun and Hades. So if we go back to his chart, his original chart, before I go to the midpoints. So if you look at his chart, he has sorry, that's the wrong chart. Sorry about that. Going back to his chart, I want to just show you the Sun and the Hades, just to show you what I mean. So there is his Sun and there is Hades. So he has got an exact Sun-Hades sesquiquadrate. And so that says something about him. Now, there are many ways in which Sun and Hades could work, but, Black Sabbath, I mean, that's pretty Sun-Hades, isn't it? I mean, it's satanic, about hell. Hades relates to hell. So you could say that he was utilizing the Sun-Hades symbolism in a way that was very effective. And as far as the midpoints are concerned, if we find his Sun, and if we find where's his Sun and his Hades? Okay, there's his Sun and his Hades. So if we put the Sun here, we see that he has got the Sun and Hades both on the Mars-Pluto midpoint. So Mars-Pluto is about the transformation of energy, asserting oneself in a way that is dramatic. And how do you assert yourself in a dramatic way? Well, it goes back to Sun and Hades, and so you can see how Black Sabbath would have worked very well for him. Now, as far as his death is concerned, so here is the chart for, well, when the helicopter left. I think these medics arrived. I think it might have been an air ambulance or something, and they left at 12:30 in Chalfont St Giles in Buckinghamshire in England. So this is when they left. So he was dead by 12:30, and so this is the chart for when he died. You can see that the Sun was just getting ready to move into Leo, so he didn't live to see the Sun moving into Leo. And we've got, in fact, the Moon the Moon was getting ready to move into Cancer. The Sun was getting ready to move into Leo, but he couldn't hold on, and so that's kind of interesting, and it may say something about the generation in which he was born. And so turning to the death and how that relates to him. So if we put Ozzie Osbourne on it, so Ozzie Osbourne's chart is in the middle, and on the outer wheel of the positions of the planets when he died, and so he has his Uranus at 29 degrees Gemini, and so the moon was exactly conjunct his Uranus when he died. And I'm thinking that perhaps that's important. It seems to me quite generational. It's almost calling time on something, calling time on this representative of a Uranus in Gemini generation. And Uranus had just gone into Gemini, so he was starting his Uranus return, and it was going to be some time before it was exact, but for him it probably was the end. And it says something about the baby boomer generation, the fact the moon is conjunct his Uranus, and also the sun at 29:55 Cancer. The sun was making a semi-sextile to Uranus. It was like the universe didn't want him to be around when the sun was in Leo, didn't want him to be around when the moon went into Cancer, didn't want that to happen. It's like time was up for him, and it seems to me that he couldn't really have lived any longer. That was it. And I think it is about his Uranus, and you have to see it in a generational way. And of course it's unfair. I mean, a lot of baby boomers are still around. Donald Trump, for example, he was born in 1946, and he's still sort of alive and perhaps well. And so I don't know how well. I mean, his presidency is running into a bit of turbulence. So those are what I would regard as the main transits going on. And then there is his solar return. So here is his solar return for let's just look at his. There are a number of solar returns that one can look at, but if you look at his solar return for 2024, so his last birthday. So for his last birthday, notice how the Sun is square Saturn. So Saturn was at 12 Pisces. He just had Saturn square his Sun. I don't know, maybe that affected his health in some way. But that Sun square Saturn in the solar return was really hard coded into his life for the rest of the year ahead. So it was a Sun Saturn square, and indeed it was a Sun Saturn square year, because that was a year in which he died. And so when you've got a solar return, do look at what is aspecting the Sun. Then you might want to consider his converse solar return. So that would be his solar return for 1872. So 1872 was 76 years before he was born. And so his converse solar return, it had a Mercury Mars square. Not an exact Mercury Mars square, and I'm not saying that is especially significant, but that's what I noticed. And then you've got converse transits. Now converse transits are kind of weird. I mean, they're like the converse return, but so you take the exact amount of time that you have been on this planet for, and then you take it backwards and you get the converse transits. And so here are his converse transits for the day he died. So this is set for April the 13th, 1872. So you get this idea that time is moving backwards and forwards as well. So you take the amount of time he's been on this planet from December the 3rd, 1948 through to his death on July 22nd, 2025. You take that time and you just take it backwards, and you take it backwards all the way to April the 13th, 1872. And what I think is rather interesting about this is Jupiter and Saturn. Jupiter was at 2109 Cancer, and Saturn was at 2103 Capricorn. So there was an exact Jupiter-Saturn opposition in his converse transits. I mean, not a Jupiter-Saturn opposition, not Jupiter aspecting his Saturn. Rather, if you take that time backwards to April the 13th, 1872, yeah, there was Jupiter-Saturn opposition. And Jupiter-Saturn is just such a generational thing, and it's such a marker of time. And this is an indication that, you know, his death marks something changing in society. Sometimes, you know, there has to be a clear out. Ozzie Osbourne has to go. I mean, he knew perhaps he had to go, but, and you know, it clears the way for something else, or maybe he's needed somewhere else. Perhaps he's just recently been conceived in somewhere, and he's just ready to move to the next level, and we'll hear about him in 20 years' time or 30 years' time. I mean, who knows? So those are his converse transits, and you know, we should. And additionally, with his converse transits, on that day, Sun was conjunct Neptune. So Sun was conjunct Neptune on April the 13th, 1872. So Sun that's conjunct Neptune, you know, you could see that might represent sort of dissolution, something dissolving, and again, that would hint to his death. In fact, the Sun conjunct Neptune is making a T-square. So you had Jupiter-Saturn opposition, and Neptune was on the T. So that event, that event on April the 13th, 1872, could well have signaled his death. And then there is his solar arc directions. And so his solar arc directions for when he died. There are a couple of solar arc directions that are worth commenting on. And one solar arc direction, he had Pluto conjunct his south node. Pluto conjunct his south node indicates maybe the path he had taken for himself may have run its course, but it was time for him to go. I mean, that's one way of looking at it. And also the Sun. His solar arc directed Sun, which is the same as his progressed Sun, secondary progressed Sun, was at 29.9 Aquarius. So his secondary progressed Sun was trine his Uranus. And so we see Uranus coming up again. So that Uranus in his chart, he had the Sun, progressed Sun, trine his Uranus, and we had transiting Moon was on his Uranus when he died. So those are some thoughts on Ozzie Osbourne. I don't feel that I can use a time of birth for him, so that does certainly limit what I can say about him. So thank you very much for listening. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.